this topic is very interesting. It is not a common subject to teach. It is pretty kind of new in the field of researchers. And the book that I'm going to use most of the time for our study sessions is called the Jewish Annotated Apocrypha. This is the book. And it was published only 2 years ago. So you know how new this kind of, like, the field is not so new, but like it's a very, very new edition of a book with a lot of interesting commentaries. And it is not an easy topic. It's pretty advanced, but I'm sure that we can do it. So we are going to start learning about it now. And if you have a question, you can raise your hand. And when I have time, I'll let you know. How about that? Okay. Okay. All right. So I prepared a presentation, the slides. I will show them to you in a second. Okay. Oops. Can you see it? Okay, good. So this is our topic, Jewish Apocrypha, and why we need to study it. As I said, it's a new topic. That's why you might have a question, why actually are we studying this and not something else? So I'll try to answer that. And this the first session today, we will look more on the history of the Jewish Apocrypha and research and what it means, and we'll hopefully start to read our first Apocrypha book. And in the subsequent sessions, we will read other books and see what they are about. So what is Apocrypha? Question number one. And here's the answer. Apocrypha, the word is coming from Greek. There is a different word that we will see later for a Jewish word for that. But in like the first iteration, it's a biblical literature that is outside of the accepted canon. Every religion, such as Judaism or Christianity or Islam or Buddhism, every religion has its own canon, books that are accepted in this religion. And these canons, they differ from one another. So Apocrypha is the books that are outside of the canon that is accepted by this specific religion. And the history of this term, it seems to mean that these were esoteric writings in the beginning. They were prized, they were tolerated, and finally excluded, meaning that in the beginning, those books were kept secret because they were considered too deep and too sacred to share it with everyone. But I'm going to share it with you with no problem. And let me just mute whoever is talking.
Many participants.
Yay. Okay. Daniel, if you see someone who's unmuted, please help. So, but later when these books, first they were too sacred and too important, then they kind of they went the opposite direction. They started to mean something that is false or heretical, because these books that were once important, they were not included in the canon, and they were deemed as dangerous because they had some ideas that were not accepted in the canon or by the mainstream religion of whatever religion we're talking about. So this is like the Greek understanding of what is Apocrypha. And here I have this kind of a table that shows you different religions. Here it is mainly Judaism and Christianity and their canons. And you might have heard in your life before that the Old Testament is equivalent of the Jewish Tanakh.
Give me something to put this again.
Okay, maybe this will help. Okay, can you hear me? Okay, awesome. So you might heard that the Old Testament is the same as Tanakh, which is not true. It only is the same in Protestant church. And other Christian denominations, they have different canons. And we will look at each of them and see how they differ from one another. And all of them have different numbers of books, and different books were included in the canon in the different time. So our Tanakh is not actually equal to anything. The closest one is the Protestant church, but others, they have more books. So let's look at that. And I'm using the tables. I did not make them. They are made by a scholar who says that he is Jewish, and he is making this wonderful charts that I'm using today. So we look at our Jewish Tanakh, and in Jewish Tanakh we have 24 books. 24 books they are the regular books that you find in your Tanakh. Like this one, this will include all 24 books, and 24 books that you know, these are the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, all of the books that we typically study, 24. So when we go to the Protestant, what is called Old Testament, the books are the same, but they have 39 books, because our books are divided differently. They do not have any Apocrypha, not in our canon. In Jewish canon, there are no Apocrypha, and not in Protestant. But when we go further and we look, for example, in Catholic, we will see that they have 39 books in the division like Protestants, but then they have additional books, and these are Apocrypha. These are the books that we are going to look at, not all of them, but some of them. And in it's very kind of complicated, and it might be confusing, but actually, bear with me. In Catholic Old Testament, there are 39 core books, but in these books that we know, there are additions. For example, in the book of Esther, there is an addition which we don't have. And that addition is a prayer of Mordecai. The reason why it is added there is because book of Esther doesn't have any mentioning of God, if you heard about that. And so there was an additional kind of insertion in that, which is a prayer where Mordecai prays to God, and it makes the whole book more godly because there is God in it finally. And the same as the book of Daniel, there is an addition to that book. But plus to that, the core books, there are other books, the books of Tobit, the book of Sirach or Ben Sirah, book of Judith, book of Baruch, First and Second Maccabees, and Book of Wisdom of Solomon. These are not in our canon. These are all apocryphal books, but they're canonical to Catholic Church. We go further to the East Orthodox Church, Slavonic churches, Greek Orthodox Church. They have the same 39 books, plus Daniel and Esther additions, plus they have one more psalm that we have. That's why the numbers of psalms are different in that, in their canon, plus prayer of Menashe. All of the books that are in Catholic, this Tobit, Sirach, Judith, Baruch, Maccabees, and Wisdom of Solomon, plus Second, First Ezra, plus Third Maccabees, and plus Fourth Maccabees. So you see here much more books. And in addition to that, we have Ethiopian Old Testament, which is different from all of those that were before. They have less book in this section. You see First and Second Maccabees are missing here, but they have Tobit, Sirach, Judith, Baruch, and Wisdom of Solomon. They have First and Second Ezra's. Instead of Maccabees, they have 1, 2, and 3 Maccabean book, which are different from Maccabees. Also, they have Jubilees, Enoch, Baruch, and Yosiphon. So you see, canons are very different. And the reason for that is some books were included earlier, some books were included later. And in our, if you remember, maybe when I just came to Beth Tikvah, before I came here, I taught on Zoom the very, very first class. It was like a demonstration class, and I taught about Song of Songs. So there is a discussion among rabbis in the Talmud, is Song of Song a canonical book? And they discuss it. Should it be included? Should it not be included? And they suggest maybe it should not. And then Rabbi Akiva comes and he says that this is just the best book of all the books and we should totally include it. So it gets included. The same story is about Book of Esther. There was a debate about that too, for the reason that I mentioned, that there's no God in that book. So why is that a holy book? If the God doesn't do anything, doesn't appear there even once, but it got included also. The same story is of Kohelet, if you remember when I spoke about it also, when I taught about that book. In Talmud, the rabbis say, you know, it has so many contradictions, but still they include it because they find it that it's also a canonical book. So these decisions were clearly made by people. Like we know for many of those books when they were included and kind of what process was that. We don't know that about the first, of course, 5 books, the Torah, you know, Bereshit, Genesis, Exodus, all of those books. We don't know when that happened. We believe that they were given to us at Mount Sinai, you know, in its entirety. So we don't know the history of that, but we go further, especially when we get to the books of prophets and the writings, the Ketuvim book, then we know what happened there. For example, I'll give you an example. There is a book in the Ketuvim that is the book of Daniel. Daniel is clearly a prophet. It's a prophetic book, but he's not in the section of the prophets because he's late. And we know that he is late because he mentions certain Babylonian kings. He also, part of that book is written in Aramaic, not in Hebrew. So we know it's late. That's why it was like included in the writings and not included in the prophets. So the process of like why these books become canonical or not, it is more or less clear to us. We know that it was done by people. And I will show you in a second the kind of the chronology of when all of that happened. But I would just want to pause if anyone has a question, if I'm talking too fast or if that makes any sense to you at all.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yes.
You mentioned in the chart the Ethiopian canon.
Yes.
Are we talking about the Ethiopian Jews or Ethiopian Christians?
Great question. In that chart, it shows Ethiopian Jews, but we will see that in that chart, it's Ethiopian Christians, but we will see that Ethiopian Jewish branch also includes some of the books, for example, Book of Jubilee and Book of Enoch that are Apocrypha in mainstream Judaism, but is preserved in Beta Israel in Ethiopian Jewish congregations. So the answer to your question is yes. It applies to both church and the Jewish stream there. And the reason why they have these books is because they were kind of separated, you know, and they developed, you know, other traditions. And these books are important. They're Jewish books. They're written by Jews, and we will look at them. And we will see why they are included there, but they're not included with us. And we will also see why that is the case. Is there any other questions? Yes, no? Good. If I talk too fast, or if you have a question, please let me know, because it's, you know, it's for us to study. It's just not for me just like to tell you a lot of information and that's it. I want you to be active with me, okay? Because when we talk to each other, you ask questions, then I learn too, and everyone learns from that. Agree? Okay. Okay, so let's look further. So the chronology of that. Of course, we're not going to go through the entire kind of chronological order of all of the books. It's a very comprehensive kind of a chart. Here, by the way, where you can find it, I found it on YouTube. The class is called Who Wrote the Bible, episode 4, the Apocrypha, and the channel is called Useful Charts. So you can find it on YouTube if you are into these things. It will give you all information about like when, what, everything was written and what it's all about. We're going to go through it really fast. So we're not going to talk about all of our main books, which were written in Israel during the Persian rule. We are going to talk about the books that are in section of Greek rule and Hasmonean rules. These are the books that are the most interesting for us. These are Enoch, Tovit, Ben Sira, Sirach, Judith, Baruch, Wisdom, Maccabees book, Jubilees, Ezra, Maccabees. There are later books, you see, which is in the section that is called post-temple, meaning after the destruction of the temple. They're relatively late. We're not going to look at them at all, but I want you to know that they exist. And the book that we are going to look today is Jubilees, which was written in Hasmonean rule, which is roughly speaking somewhere 2nd century BCE, way before the destruction of the temple. And we will look later at other books, but the very interesting book is Book of Enoch, that was written, you see, very early in Greek rule, before the book of Daniel. So why am I saying that is to kind of clarify that the books that became Apocrypha, they became Apocrypha not necessarily because they were late, but for other reasons. Some of them were quite early, like Book of Enoch. Tovit and Ben Sira are also in the same, era, but they were still not included. And that's not because they were early, it's because late, it's because they have something that were not accepted by the later development of Judaism. And all of these books are written by Jews. These are Jewish books, like no question about that. They were written way before Christianity existed. They're preserved for us in Christian canons, but that doesn't mean that they're Christian books. That's also very important to understand. These books are way, way, way before Christianity appeared, because Christianity appeared here in post-temple era, right? And that was way before that. That was, as we assume, most of that was written during the Hasmonean rule, and that we will talk more about because it's Hanukkah time. Today is Rosh Chodesh Kislev, so Chodesh Tov to everyone, wishing you a blessed month. And we are getting ready for Hanukkah. So most of these books were written in this period, either in Greek rule or when after the Hasmonean revolt, when Jews reconquered land for ourselves and became, the rulers of our land once again. So this was a very kind of prolific period for all those books to be written. Okay, questions about this chart? No? Okay.
Rabbi, I
Yes.
just wanted to ask you, what was the system of making the decision? Was it a group of rabbis? Were they elected? Were they, who made the decision as to what went into the Apocrypha and
Yeah. So in the canon that we have, rabbis made the decisions. They decide what went into canon or not. But that doesn't mean that these were books non-canonical before, because you see, they were written way before rabbis appeared on the scene. They were written in Greek era. There were no rabbis yet. If we talk scholarly about it. If we don't say Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe was the first rabbi. I mean, rabbis like rabbis of today, the rabbinic Judaism haven't existed yet. So these books, they were part of our canon at that time. They were later removed for whatever reason, but this decision was made by rabbis. No one appointed them. It's just what we rabbis do, which is common. We decide how to live.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I noticed in the Persian rule we have Torah. So that's the implication that the Torah was not given in its entirety at Mount Sinai, but it was edited and written during Persian rule. Is that correct?
It was edited according to this chart. You see, it's it has this dots.
Yeah.
And it has you see this J and E. So it means that these parts were written in this early time, which is about 850 BCE, and some other parts like Isaiah was written there. Then there were this parts and that parts, and during the Persian rule, they were combined together. But they existed before. This is not, the scholarship of that whole system It is very complicated, and there are different theories about that. Like if you talk about it like scholarly, not spiritually, not like traditionally, as it is taught in traditional Judaism, we look at that as scholars, then most of them would agree that the formation of the Torah was somewhere in Persian rule. Doesn't mean that it was written in the Persian rule. It means that the way we have it today was somehow completed in that area. We know that after that, after the Persian rule, there is no editing of that whole part. Only
So
the
the
Torah
Torah
is,
could have been in different parts. It could have been written, but not as we have it today before. How we have it today is when it first appeared there in Persian rule.
yes.
Okay.
but Rabbi, they were included. Just to understand, they were included in the canon, and when the rabbinic era began in roughly 70 post destruction of the temple,
Yeah.
as the how can I put it, as the theology expanded to replace offering with prayer, included in all of that is the development of what became the Apocrypha, what was included and not included.
Yeah.
It happens, it happens in the post-temple era. Everything was included up until then, and then decisions were made to exclude certain things for whatever reason.
Yeah, well, let me clarify it a little bit. When we
Okay.
talk about canon as a thing, like the idea, that thing was invented by Christians. Before
Right.
Christians, there was no such thing. Like this did not exist as a book. First of all, they used scrolls, and they had separate scrolls, a lot of them.
Right.
And Christians were actually the first ones who came together and they bind it in one book. That's why, by the way, one of the reasons, not exactly that's why, but like they were the first one. One of the reasons why our divisions of the chapters,
There's our chapters and verses by Christians.
that is done by Christians, yes.
That's right.
So in that era of like Hasmonean rule and Persian rule, obviously, and before, there were no books, there were only scrolls, and you have a lot of scrolls. So at some time after the destruction of the temple, decisions were made which scrolls we take and which scrolls we say they are not kosher.
So just to understand then, before chapter and verse, was there the book of Bereshit and the book of Shemot?
Yeah.
Or was it all one long scroll? There was a division in the scroll where one book ends. Is that the modern division, or is it or is that the way it's been for the millennia?
It is relatively modern division.
Okay.
It is divided by the rabbis.
Okay.
That's why they have different names. That's why we call Bereshit, but it's also called Genesis, or we call it like it's called, for example, Leviticus, right?
Right.
These names, they're actually coming from the different Jewish tradition, because the Leviticus was a Jewish tradition called the Sefer Kohanim, the book of the Kohens, and that's how it got translated into Leviticus. So these names are not entirely Christian. They seem from the ways rabbis call these books too. So,
Wow.
okay, right. Let's go see what's next. So, what is Jewish Apocrypha? We spoke about what Apocrypha means, kind of in Greek or Christian or general sense, but it's different from what we call it specifically a Jewish Apocrypha. So in Hebrew, it's called Hasfarim HaChitzonim, the external books that are not in canon. And these are a small group of Jewish texts that were written during and after the Second Temple period, meaning when the Second Temple was still standing, and in different countries. Most of it is composed in Hebrew, but some of them were in Greek and Aramaic. As I mentioned, like Book of Daniel, that is in our canon, is also partially in Aramaic. And as it says here, in antiquity, some Jewish communities considered them these compositions, sacred texts, and even incorporate them in their respective biblical canons. Nevertheless, they were not included in what became the prevailing Jewish biblical canon, namely the Masoretic canon. The canon that we are using now is called Masoretic. It got unified at some point in time. We don't really know exactly when that happened, but like, for example, Tamei Mikra, the way we read it, how do we know how to pronounce the words, all of that, it was also done by the Masoretic tradition. And just to mention that, again, one of the sources that I used for these classes is an article that is written by amazing scholar Hanan Gafni. He's an Israeli scholar, and he's a teacher of mine. When I studied in Israel, he taught me. He did not teach me this specific topic, other topics, midrashim and so on. And he wrote an article, "They are ours," reclaiming the Apocrypha as Jewish texts. Why he's saying that is that these texts, they were kind of lost for Judaism for centuries because they were in Christian Bible, and we did not want to touch them. And then, we will see how that happened in the history. Kind of came to realization that these are actually our books, so why don't we touch it? So that's what we are doing today. The reasons why they were excluded, just to give you some examples, what rabbis thought about it, reflecting on the verse of Ecclesiastes, and further by this, my son, be admonished of making many books, there is no end. And the rabbis say about that, anyone who brings into their home more than the 24 books of Tanakh brings a riot into their home. So beware. Will bring some riot. They were afraid of those books because of the things that are written in those books, which they didn't like. But that was rabbinic approach. It changed over the time. And we will see that through the centuries, you see, from rabbis, which we would say 2nd, 3rd, 5th century CE till like 16th century, which is like more than 1,000 years later. It took only 1,000 years to start thinking about these books again. Different Jewish scholars, they shared their opinions, and we'll see how these opinions change in time. So Gedalia ben Yahya, an Italy Jewish scholar, he writes, it's proper for you to know that the Gentiles added other works to the collections of the Holy Scriptures, which are currently not in our possession, and I wish to present them so you become familiar with them. So he was the first one who actually started to present the books to Jews and mentioning them in his Jewish scholarship and writings. And Azaria de Rossi, also an Italian scholar, he says from the Apocrypha, Hasfarim HaChitzoniim, which include many nonsensical things, it's nevertheless possible to derive something of value, whether it be correct conduct or intellectual knowledge. So we see here first kind of steps of like thinking, they are not really kosher, but like it's good for your intellectual development to see them and understand what is written in them, why it is written in them. And 18th century, Naftali Herz Vizeli from Germany, he translated into Hebrew the first book, The Wisdom of Solomon. And there is his kind of a testimony and his introduction to this, where he says, this is a child of one of the Hebrews saying that, these books are really ours and we can study them. It's very important. Yes.
Our question. So just in the chronology, because I like to think sometimes chronologically, would a scholar like Rashi in the 11th century and later Maimonides, the Rambam, would they have referred at all to any? Would they have been aware of the apocryphic books? Would they have referred to them? Would there have been nuggets that they would have used to prove something as a pshat?
Yeah, great question. So I'll tell you about Rashi. To the best of my knowledge, Maimonides, okay, I don't know about Maimonides, so I'm not going to say, but about Rashi, I can tell you that there is one place in his commentaries where he mentions the book of Ben Sira. And Ben Sira is a very interesting book that's called Sirach, and this in that chart it was called. Ben Sira is interesting because it's not canonical, but it is the book that is mentioned in Talmud several times. Rabbis who did not include it still quote it. So it means that it was quite popular book. The reason why they did not include it, we will see when we'll get to that book, probably in that case because it was late. But Rashi mentions that, but he says, I found in the, writings, like commentaries of our sages, I wrote this quote. I found this quote from the Torah, and they searched everything, and I couldn't find where it comes from. So probably it comes from Ben Sira, which indicates that he definitely knew of that, but he's saying it in a way like, well, I'm not sure, I did not read it. So he's like standing away from that. He does not get involved, but he definitely knew that
Okay.
book existed. But they did not incorporate it in their commentaries.
Would it have been considered a heresy,
Yeah.
or it would have invalidated their comment?
I don't think they had a perception yet of the fact that these were Jewish books. Really, they were in Christian Bible. So why would they study them, right? And it only once real scholarship developed, like we get real scholars, that's why it's important that it's like 16th century, 18th century. That's much later when we actually have like a concept of scholarship and people start to look at this historically, as you like to do, is like in a timeline, understand how it developed. Only then we start to understand that these are actually our books.
Okay,
so
thank you.
Judah Leib ben Zev, he translated the book of Ben Sira and the book of Judith. What is important here is that they translated it into Hebrew, meaning that they did not have, of course, the Hebrew original because it was preserved in the Christian Bibles, meaning that it was either in Greek or in Latin. What they do is that they translate it into Hebrew. I have a question for you. Why do you think they're doing that?
Because that was the language of the time, the same way that we translate into English now.
Was that in 18th century, Hebrew was the language of the time?
No. Oh, translated into Hebrew.
I think you said before they wanted to cut out certain sections. So if they translated, they could leave out the part that they didn't want to put in.
They didn't do it. They translated the whole thing.
Okay, so they didn't edit at all.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I'll tell you, it's actually a very, very important point why they did it, is because they were already participating in this like revival of Hebrew against Yiddish.
Okay.
This was like a very patriotic move for them, right? We're reclaiming our books and we're translating them into Hebrew. So it was also very important literary work and scholarship of how to translate something into Hebrew and create this type of book. So it was very, very important for them. It's like they were very patriotic of Hebrew language. Okay. Right. So two more examples of 18th/19th century. Second, Isaac Frankel of Hamburg, he also made his translation, and I think that he actually made the first translation of collection. Like before him, scholars translated just like several books, and he attempted to have like a full collection translated. And he writes in an introduction this poem, which I'll read to you. It's part of the poem, it's much longer. My brothers, why should I be buried in foreign soil? Are there lies in my mouth or falsehoods in my tongue? Why do you hate me like an intoxicated man? Let me know what is my guilt and what is my sin. Do you not fear sinning with your own blood, alienating the testimony of your forefathers, ascribing fault to your mother's son, dismissing faithful words as lies? Return, my companions, honor the memory of your forefathers, for only the mercy and praise of God is on my lips. So this poem is clearly written as if like these apocryphal books were talking to us and saying, why do you reject me? I'm one of you. I was written by your forefathers, foremothers. And you see that these people, again, though, they were scholars, of course, but that doesn't mean that they were like anti-religion scholars. They were not atheists. They did it in a pure belief that these are godly inspired books, that these books are part of our tradition, and that it is like good thing to do to translate them and to bring them back. So, and the other one here is Solomon Plasner, also I believe from Germany, and I have resettled them in the place from which they were expelled and restored to them the divine garb they used to wear, so the house of Jacob can rejoice in them as before. So again, his idea is that he's doing it for, religious, spiritual reasons, so we can enjoy them once again, not because he wants to tell us that these books are written by human beings, that's why they're not important. That's not the idea. He wanted to restore their divine garb, like he wanted them to be praised again, and like they were considered as babies who were stolen by Christians, but it's time to bring them back. So that was really their attitude. So, and they did a lot of work at translating them into Hebrew, and this very poetic and very, very difficult project. So a lot of people in that time, not a lot, but relatively a lot of people independently from one another were trying to make these translations and to give the access of these books to our Jewish public. And, they did a great job in translating them until, what happened. In 1896, Professor Solomon Schechter, very important figure in conservative Judaism, assisted by the Lewis and Gibson sisters, discovered the Cairo-Geniza, and above all, an original Hebrew version of Ben Sira. Ben Sira is the book that I mentioned before. It's a book that is quoted in Talmud, the book that is mentioned by Rashi, and they actually found the Hebrew original, and that it was a final proof that, right, these are definitely our books, because they existed in Hebrew. Nobody knew that before. So are you familiar with Cairo-Geniza? Have you heard about that before? I'll just briefly kind of remind everyone. So Cairo-Geniza,
Yes,
is oh, good. I'm happy that you know about that. Is a kind of a depository, a storage of all kinds of texts that we also have this kind of Geniza even in our synagogue, where the sacred texts go when they get too old. And they were not buried, but they were stored in a room. And then Solomon Schechter discovered them, probably unethically took them to United States. Parts of them are preserved in Jewish Theological Seminary, where I studied. So Solomon Schechter is a very, very important person for conservative Judaism. One of the, not a founder for Jewish Theological Seminary, but one of the key founders, let's put it this way. And here is a part from his letter. He writes, this is a quote from his letter, "Dear Mrs. Lewis, I think we have reason to congratulate ourselves, for the fragment I brought with me represents a piece of the original Hebrew of Ecclesiasticus." That's another name for Ben Sira. Don't confuse it with Ecclesiastes, that is Kohelet. "It is the first time such a thing has been discovered. Please do not speak yet about the matter. In haste and great excitement, yours sincerely, Solomon Schechter." So it was a huge discovery, absolutely, changed everything, because we found a proof that these books existed in Hebrew, because for most of the books, we did not have Hebrew originals at that time. So why should we study it? That's a question. You might think, Rabbi, you're out of your mind. Why should we do that? Okay, they're not canonical, they're extra books. Why are they important? Why, if they're in Christian canon, why bother? And so on and so forth. Maybe you have this question. So there are different reasons for that. And some of them we saw already, that one of the first reasons is actually curiosity, really wanting to know what are in these books. If they were written by Jews, I want to know what's there. I want to know what they wrote. As this scholar said, my forefathers, what did they think? What did they write? Why did they do it? How did it influence later Jewish tradition? So one thing is curiosity, of course. And there are other reasons, so let's look at them. I think curiosity is just my main reason. So reason number one reclaiming our heritage of Jewish books preserved in Christian Bible, meaning that as Jews, that's a moment of empowerment, right? We were subjugated to Christian rule for so many centuries, and finally we have enough strength to actually come and say, you know, these are our books and we are going to study them and we are going to know what they're about. And again, reminding maybe Christians again that, you know, everything you have comes from us, actually. Don't forget about that. So it's a reclaiming heritage empowerment moment. Second, understanding the history of the sacred text. It really, really helps us to look at our books and understand how they were written, by whom, when, and what was the process. A real clear understanding of that, I think, is intellectually honest, and it doesn't diminish the role of those books, even if we understand the human, you know, impact on that. But again, as I spoke before, if anyone was at my class about the Satan in our tradition, I think I mentioned it there as well, is that, you know, even if I understand that these books are written by human beings or edited or whatever, it's still the work of God, as everything in this world. So it doesn't diminish their importance for me. And number three, learning about diverse pluralistic Judaism in antiquity. What it helps us to understand that Judaism was not, you know, one Judaism, as our Orthodox brothers and sisters would claim that, you know, there was one true Judaism and then all this kind of other movements appeared, you know, like Reform and Conservative, Reconstructionist, whatever, which is not true, because Judaism was always diverse, and especially it was diverse in antiquity. In that period of time, there were a lot of different, you know, communities that spoke different languages, lived in different countries. So studying the books really kind of demonstrates that, exactly that even the canon was different, and some books were accepted in those communities, some are not. So these are the main reasons, and I hope that these reasons are compelling to you and we can continue studying these books together.
Rabbi, as a
Yes.
child, I was exposed to this very peripherally, probably didn't understand it, but there was a measure of verboteness to touching the Apocrypha.
Yeah.
And I just found that you haven't quite mentioned that, and I wondered if that was a factor.
Well, what do you mean I haven't mentioned that?
No, I'm just, no, what I mean is, I think the way it was presented to me, and again, I was very young and I don't suppose that I understood it, but that it was verboten and you couldn't touch it.
Yeah, but I said about it in the beginning. Our rabbi said, like, if you read more than 24 books, you bring calamity in your house. Definitely, they didn't like it. It's very, as I said, this book that I'm using for this sessions, it was published 2 years ago. It's a very new field. Like, as I said, the scholarship, it developed since 16th century. Well, we understand again that this is like more than 1,000 years after these books were written, almost 2,000 years. So even today, like in more Orthodox streams, they would say like we shouldn't touch it.
Yeah.
So if you don't want to touch them, you don't have to stay. But I would love you to stay. I think it's not dangerous.
I was for the doom.
I think it's very interesting. So let's begin at least looking at our first book that we're going to study, and it's called the Book of Jubilees. And the Book of Jubilees is not the first book, like, let's say, wait a second, canonical. Like here, if we go back to this chart, see Book of Jubilees is like here in the Hasmonean rule, right? So it was written later than, let's say, Book of Enoch or Tobit or Ben Sira. So it's like not the first book that was written. But the reason why I included it as a first book is that because this book is based on Genesis, on Bereshit. So it's like in the chronology of the Tanakh. If that was a part of our canon, it would be in the beginning. That's why I started with this. So Book of Jubilee was composed somewhere in the 2nd century BCE. And sometimes it's called Lesser Genesis, Leptogenesis, because as I said, it retells the story of Genesis. It's an ancient Jewish religious work of 50 chapters. That's important that there are 50 for a reason. Considered canonical by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, as well as Beth Israel Ethiopian Jews. Here is an answer again to your question that in Jewish tradition of Ethiopian Jews, this is a canonical book. It is known there as a book of division. What's very important to know that we actually have some of the originals of these books because they were found in Qumran. And they were actually found, more copies of Jubilees were found in Qumran than any other books of Hebrew Bible, even canonical for us. Why is that? Because that book was very, very important for them. And Qumran community, we don't know too much about them. We know that they lived in the Dead Sea region. They're very interesting travel that you can take in Israel, like an excursion to where they used to live. There's excavations there. It's very interesting. You can see, learn about their lives and what kind of people they were. They were Jews, but they were like a sect. They decided to go and live in the desert to separate themselves from the rest of the world, which they deemed to be unclean and kind of polluted. And they were very, very obsessed with this questions of purity, impurity, and they wanted to have their holy life there. And portions of this book were discovered among Dead Sea Scrolls, meaning the Qumran sect Dead Sea Scrolls is the same thing. Dead Sea Scrolls, they were found in Israel in, if I'm not mistaken, 1947, because it's the same year as the independence of Israel. And they were found in a cave. And so we have pieces of this Book of Jubilees there. So we know, talking again about the question, what was canon, what was not, for them, that was a real book that they used. Also mentioned in Damascus document. Damascus document is another document that is very important for Qumran community. And it is mentioned in Midrash Tatshe. That is to your, Doug, question, either if rabbis ever quote these books or not. That is a very, very late Midrash, 12th century, 1,000 years later than the book was written. And it's not a very common Midrash to use, but it has some analogies with Book of Jubilees. It doesn't say it quotes Book of Jubilees, but it has very, very similar part. So we know that it was known to rabbis of the say that they knew it because of the kind of rejection of that, of thinking that it's dangerous. So let's look at this book. Key features. Number one, retelling the story of Genesis with more details. This book, it starts with the creation of the world, and it ends kind of with the revelation at Mount Sinai, a little bit. Doesn't really pay much attention to that. Most of it is really the story of patriarchs and matriarchs with more details. They have additional details of their lives that we don't have in our Tanakh, their family relationships, all kinds of things. Very interesting, expanded version. Yes.
Question, where does the validation for additional detail come from? And it takes me back to your sermon about was Isaac really killed or not? And you have a lot of midrash that talks it. So where does the detail come from?
Where the details of all the books come from?
Yeah.
It's the same question. You would take, let's say, our Bereshit, and it has some details of the stories. Where do these details come from? For Dead Sea community, for Qumran, these were equivalent books. For them, there was no question where these details come from. So they didn't need to explain that. It's from our perspective, we know that it's external book. For them, it was completely internal. So for them, they were the same, even probably more value than some other books because of how many copies were found there. So how do we know where the details from any books are coming from? Who wrote them? Why?
Okay.
Does it make sense?
Not yet, but
Yeah.
it'll come. Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet, but
All right.
I think I know where you're going with this, but I'm not 100% sure yet. Anyway, carry on.
Okay. Second key feature of Jubilees. All history is divided in the cycles of 50 years. That's why it has 50 chapters. 50 is very, very important number. That's why it's called Jubilees, because in Tanakh, the years are divided in these portions, like 49 years. It's like 7 years, seven times 7 years gets 49. The 50th year is a Jubilee year where like all kinds of things happen. Land gets back to their owners, like slaves go free, a lot of things change. So it's like a celebration year. So what Book of Jubilee does is that they take the entire history from the creation of the world to the revelation of Mount Sinai and divide it in this like 45 or 50 years structure. And so they will have, for each event, they will say it happened in such and such Jubilee year. So it's very well structured and has like the whole chronology very clear in this book. Number 3, also very important, and insists in the use of solar calendar. We use the combination of moon calendar and solar calendar. That's why today is Rosh Chodesh, meaning it's a new moon. They did not like it. And this is probably one of the key reasons why it didn't make it into our canon, this book. We will look at the examples later. Another thing very important, it has developed angelology, and it has the ideas of fallen angels. And this refers back to my class about Satan. Here, Satan calls Prince Mastema, meaning the hatred one, but it's a prominent character. Number 5, holidays and laws are revealed to patriarchs before Moshe. Since the beginning, from Adam and Eve times, people knew how to do sacrifices. They celebrated holidays. That is not in our Tanakh. In our Tanakh, these laws are given much later. And the last but not least is the huge importance of sexual purity. Very big theme in this book. So let's look at some examples so you understand better what I'm talking about. And there is a lot of text, and I will read slowly through some of them, and we will continue in our next class to read all of them. So this is chapter 2. The chapter 1 is like a preface, not important for our studies today, but this is the real beginning. And the angel of the presence, spoke to Moses according to the word of the Lord, saying, write the complete history of the creation, how in 6 days the Lord God finished all his work and all that he created, and kept Sabbath, Shabbat on the 7th day, and hallowed it for all ages, and appointed as a sign for all his works. For on the first day he created the heavens, which are above, and the earth, and the waters, and all the spirits which serve before him, the angels of the presence, and the angels of sanctification, and the angels of the spirit of the fire, and the angels of the spirit of the winds, and the angels of the spirit of the clouds, and of darkness, and of snow, and of hail, and of hoarfrost, and the angels of the voice of the thunder, and of the lightning, and the angels of the spirits of cold and heat, and of winter, and of spring, and of autumn, and of summer, and all of the spirits of his creatures, which are in the heavens and on the earth. He created the abysses and the darkness, evening and night, and the light, dawn and day, which had prepared in the knowledge of his heart. This is like really the beginning, and it explains what's going to happen in all of the books. As I said, it's going to retell the whole history of creation with additional details. First of all, this book speaks in the voice of angels. Angels are talking to Moshe, and they're telling him, like, write down everything that we are talking about. And again, it's important because angels are much more present here than in our Tanakh. In Tanakh, angels do not really appear that much, to be honest. They kind of, most of the time, they don't have any names. They just like serve as messengers. Here, angels are very, very prominent, and there are spirits for everything. you see in darkness and snow and these types of angels and that types of angels. So in Talmud, we will see these ideas too, that there are angels for everything. For like every blade of grass, there is a separate angel, but it's like not in our canon, but it is in the Book of Jubilees. So this is really the beginning. And then it will, as I said, it will go through the entire history, and angels will talk to Moshe and they will say like, we said this, we did that. So it's really written in the speech of angels, which is pretty cool if you ask me. Just some examples of how the chronology works there. For example, we go to chapter 3. In the first week was Adam created and Rib, his wife. In the second week, he showed her unto him. And in the first week of the first Jubilee, Adam and his wife were in the Garden of Eden for 7 years, tilling and keeping it. So that's what I said about dividing everything in Jubilees. So we remember that Jubilee is 50 years. So when they say first week, that means 7 years. That's not a week of the weeks. It's like week of the year. So the first 7 years, and it will have like for every event, it will have like a specific date in this calendar. Let's look at chapter 4. In the 11th Jubilee, Jared took to himself a wife. I honestly included it only because of the name Jared. And her name was Baraka, the daughter of Rasuyal, a daughter of his father's brother. By the way, it will have much more names than in our Tanakh. It will it has much more details on that. In the 4th week of the Jubilee, meaning 4 times 7 years, and she bare him a son in the 5th week, meaning the 5th cycle of 7 years, in the 4th year of the Jubilee, and he called his name Enoch. And he was the first among men that are born on earth who learned writing and knowledge and wisdom, and who wrote down the signs of heaven according to the order of their months in a book, that men might know the seasons of the year according to the order of their separate months. And he was the first to write a testimony, and he testified to the sons of men among the generations of the earth, and recounted the weeks of the Jubilees, and made known to them the days of the years, and set in order the months, and recounted the Sabbaths of the year as we made them known to him. So Enoch is a very, very important person. We will look at his entire book of Enoch. I mentioned this book again in the class about Satan, because it also has a lot of information about the creation story and angels and all of that. Why Enoch is so important, I'll tell you briefly, is even in Talmud, he is a very, very important figure. He is it says in the Tanakh that he was taken to the heavens alive. And in later tradition in Talmud, he actually becomes an angel himself, and he gets the name of Metatron, the very important angel, the one who stands behind the throne, like in the hierarchy of angels, the highest angel of all angels. So he had like secret knowledge and all of that. So he's a very important figure. But here, the whole kind of system of Jubilees is ascribed to him. He was the first one who had the knowledge, and he shared it with everyone. And we will see in the next class, why is that actually important? So this is a cliffhanger. We're going to finish our class today with that, and I will see you next week. Please come. And if you have questions, and meanwhile, you can ask them. I will let everyone go. If you want to stay and ask a question, you can do that. But otherwise, I'm wishing you Rosh Chodesh Tov and good night. And I'm excited to study more in the next class.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi. That was
Thank you.
Thank you.